Okay, well, we have a lot to cover today. So Haley, why don't we get started with the slideshow? Welcome back, everyone. I know it's been about a year since our last community advisory group meeting. So thanks for your patience while we prepared all the material we're going to share today. Thanks for being here and for your continued input and support of the Fauntleroy Ferry Terminal project. We're going to get started here in just a moment. I'll run through our meeting objectives for today. We'll be sharing an update on the planning and environmental linkages process, the planning study that we've been working on for the last several years. And Marcia will share an update on the timeline for the project. We're looking forward to gathering your input on refined terminal alternatives, so the range of alternatives we're considering for replacing the dock, and also having your assistance reviewing the draft level 3 screening criteria, the criteria that we'll be using to evaluate those alternatives that we shared with you in email ahead of the meeting. So looking forward to getting your feedback on that and hearing your comments. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Laura Labisner-Miller, who's our meeting facilitator tonight, and she'll get us started.
Thank you, Hadley, and welcome everyone. Before we start, I want to welcome all of the community members in attendance. You will be in listen-only mode tonight, and won't have access to submit comments in the chat box. We will have a few minutes for public comments and questions after the presentation. We also encourage you to email your comments to the project team, and Haley will drop that email address into the chat box. As a reminder, we are recording this meeting and will be posting the video on the project website for anyone who couldn't attend live. So as I mentioned, we do have some time after the presentation to answer questions and take written comments from community members in attendance this evening. You can submit questions or comments as you think of them throughout the meeting, throughout the presentation, using the Q&A feature in Zoom, as shown on the screen. We will also send out an updated comment log to our CAG members following the meeting, and we'll continue sharing comments we receive with the entire project team. And then just a few friendly reminders about the Zoom features we are using for our CAG members this evening. We'll use the chat feature during the discussion portions. And to make sure your chat feature is working, if CAG members could please type into the chat and send to everyone your name and the name of the community that you're representing, so our community members can see. So we have Susan from Vashon and Justin and Devin, all from Vashon, as well as Michelle. Anne representing both Vashon and West Seattle. Thank you, everyone. We have Frank, Judy, David, and Angus. We appreciate you all being here this evening and your patience this past year. So we have a lot of content to cover. This is an overview of our agenda. We plan to recap where we've been before sharing an update on our planning process and refined terminal alternatives. As I mentioned, we'll pause for CAG member discussion at a couple of points during the meeting to review on the alternatives, and then also reviewing the screening criteria we plan to use to evaluate these alternatives. We'll have more time for discussion and comment towards the end of the meeting and before we look forward to our next steps. And with that, I will pass it back over to Hadley.
Thanks, Laura. Okay, so let's just do a brief recap of where we've been, because it's been a really long time since we all met. And we also have a number of members of the public who are joining us today, community members interested in this. And we have about 30 members of the audience for those who can't see the participant list. This graphic shows the process we've been following to refine the alternatives to replace the Fauntleroy Ferry Terminal. As you can see, we started with sort of the sky's the limit, all the alternatives during level 1. We screened out any alternatives that would have moved the terminal to a new location away from its current location. Then we went through level 2 screening about a year ago, where we screened out some of the alternatives that would have major impacts on the local roadways that were incompatible with transit, and other screening criteria that we had during level 2. And what we arrived at the time were 2 alternatives that the project team's been working for the last year to refine those alternatives and develop more detailed planning level alternatives that we'll discuss tonight. So the next slide shows the screening level 1 and level 2. Based on input from all of you and our other advisory groups, we screened out alternatives and away from the current location, mainly because of the impacts and the level of service they would have. We also screened out alternatives that would have impacted local parks or required reconfiguring local streets. So when we met with you last time, we shared 2 basic alternatives that we were going to be carrying forward through the Pell process. One was replacing the dock with the same size as today in the same location to hold approximately 80 vehicles like it does today. The rest of the vehicles would continue to line up along Fauntleroy Way. We also agreed to consider continue studying strategies such as good to go, advanced ticketing, and other strategies to make the current dock configuration work better than it does today. So same size dock location at the same location. And then the other alternative that we agreed to carry forward was an expanded terminal that would hold up to 186 vehicles on the dock, and or 124, that range, 124 to 186 vehicles, which is the size of the vessels that serve this route. We also announced at that time that any expansion would avoid or minimize permanent impacts to the nearshore environment and to areas such as Cove Park. So we wouldn't be widening the dock over Cove Park on the land side. So that's where we ended up with you when we last met about a year ago, with those 2 very general alternatives. And now I want to turn it over to Marcia, who's going to give a little more detail on the project timeline and the planning study. Marcia.
Thanks, Hadley. I'm Marcia Tolan, with an environmental lead for the project. So we really appreciate your patience this past year as we've navigated the planning and environmental linkages process and worked to refine the alternatives. PEL, as it's known, is a fairly new planning process and involves collaborating with the community and our partners early in the project planning process. This timeline shows an updated outlook for the project from where we started in 2021 through 2029. We've developed a purpose and need for the project, conducted level 1 and 2 screening of alternatives, and are now starting the level 3 screening process, where we will consider criteria such as traffic conditions, cost estimates, permitting requirements, and ways to make the terminal work safer and more efficient for everyone. We will also study good to go and advanced ticketing. All this work will help us identify a planning level preferred alternative for further environmental review under NEPA, where we will use specific methodology to evaluate the potential impacts on the built and natural environment. Using an updated project schedule, we plan to complete design and begin construction by 2027. Please note that there is some overlap between project phases, which indicates there is some flexibility in the way the project would be delivered. We're working to refine this delivery approach, and we'll share updates at a later time. This multi-year process will continue to include multiple opportunities for input from our advisory group and the broader community. This image shows key features near the terminal considered with development of the alternatives and which are factors considered when screening the alternatives. One of the complexities of this project is the constrained site. To the south, there's the King County Rapid Ride bus station on Fauntleroy Way, which provides essential connection to and from the terminal. To the north, there's the King County Barton Street pump station, and on the south again, there's a Seattle Public Utilities property and a parking lot owned by the City of Seattle. Intertidal and nearshore habitats include eelgrass and macroalgae near the dock. This offers habitat for salmon and other marine life. A recent underwater video survey confirmed there is no eelgrass in the area around the end of the dock where propeller wash from vessels creates a scour hole, which the scour hole has prevented some macroalgae growth. Fauntleroy Creek exits a culvert under Fauntleroy Way southwest and then flows south of the dock and currently angles under the dock to the north and then into Puget Sound. Fauntleroy Creek provides spawning and habitat for salmon and trout. The aging dock is supported by creosote-treated timber piles and together with the structure contains more than 1,000 tons of toxic creosote-treated timbers. It's a known pollutant for the marine habitat and water. The dense timber piles change the flow of the creek and cause debris and driftwood to snag and collect under the trestle on the shore. This makes it difficult for fish to pass to and from Fauntleroy Creek. Then just to the north of the terminal is Cove Park. It offers public waterfront access and has a narrow sandy beach next to the dock. And then just across from the intersection is Captain's Park, which provides a green public open space with a bench for seating across Fauntleroy Way southwest from the terminal entrance. So I'll pass on now to David Sowers to introduce the dock concepts.
All right. Well, thank you, Marcia. Again, I'm David Sowers. I'm the Director of Terminal Engineering for Washington State Ferries. In my department, I manage all planning, permitting, design, construction, and maintenance for all 19 ferry terminals. So before I start my portion of the presentation, I wanted to mention an event I attended on Monday. And I thought of all of you as I was talking to stakeholders as part of the Coleman Dock opening, the mayor, the governor, shaking hands and high-fiving folks and thinking of having an opportunity with all of you to do much the same when we open your new Fauntleroy terminal. So let's jump into the meat of the presentation here. We're going to talk about the alternatives. There's several key features of the alternatives that I want to make sure I mention here. First, we're going to replace the dock at the same location, and Hadley described that as part of the level 1 screening. All of the alternatives you see accommodate 186 vehicles, whether those vehicles are on the dock or on Fauntleroy Way in various percentages. We will continue to accommodate 186 vehicles. We want our new facility to meet current design standards for seismic, as well as accommodate predicted sea level rise. We want all the alternatives to have space for large trucks to safely navigate, and that is particularly important at the toll booth entrance, where the space there is tight. We're going to have alternatives that have wider lanes and space for people walking, rolling, biking, and driving motorcycles. As many of you know, we do not have designated bicycle lanes or designated staging areas for bicycles and motorcycles today. So that's something that each of these alternatives you see will address. We're going to have more space for our operations. We're going to include a new terminal building that accommodates our passengers. We're going to have better drop-off and pickup areas for passengers with disabilities. This is extremely important to us. And that area is kind of underserved with the existing facility. And then we're going to have a slightly larger toll plaza with 2 toll booths. Again, of course, we're doing this to accommodate those truck turning radiuses. And so in doing this, there will be some minimal dock widening near the shoreline. But those are all consistent themes across all the alternatives that we're going to show. In addition to these features, we're also studying Good to Go. We're going to be studying advanced ticketing and as well as other features like overhead passenger loading, and as well working with our partners at SDOT to consider changes to the intersection. And so we're going to share more about those features at our next CAG meeting. So there's slight variations to each of the alternatives, as you can imagine. I'm going to run through those options quickly now to show those differences. And so this is going to be kind of a few seconds per alternative, but we're going to just walk through those. And then we'll go back and we'll talk about each of the alternatives themselves. And particularly as I pull up this next slide here, I want you to take note of the changes to the dock between each of these alternatives. I want you to note the width change, the length change, and in particular, that dark blue area that you see around the dock that Marcia touched on is the eelgrass area that exists today. And you'll see the scour hole that she talked about that's developed in that first slide. So kind of take a look at those. We're going to flip through those one more time. All right, great. Thank you. And now I'm going to hand the presentation over to Ed Thomas. Ed is our design manager for the project, and he's going to walk through the specifics of each of these alternatives. Ed?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Yeah, as Dave mentioned, I'm Ed Thomas. I'm the engineering lead on the project, responsible for development of the alternatives that we're presenting today. And as a reminder, once we get through the description of the alternatives, we're going to have a pause for the Q&A session. So as we start here, the first option, alternative A, replaces the dock at the same size as the current dock and maintains the existing wing walls and dolphins, which are the in-water structures that help guide the ferry into place and protect the transfer span and the dock. This alternative has 4 holding lanes similar to existing, but holds 76 vehicles, which is 8 fewer vehicles than the current dock. This concept is slightly wider than the current dock to provide space for a large vehicle to safely navigate on the dock and to provide dedicated space for pedestrians, cyclists, and vehicles. Alternative A1 is the same width as alternative A, but is slightly longer than the existing dock and includes new wing walls and dolphins. This option, again, has 4 holding lanes and holds the same amount of vehicles as the current dock, which is 84 vehicles. Alternatives A2 and A3 are variations of A1 that have the same layout as A1, but alternative A2 will apply good to go, and alternative A3 would apply advanced ticketing technology. Alternative B is the same width as A1 again, but a longer dock, moving the ferry slip, which is the transfer span, wing walls, and dolphins, out to deeper water. This option has 4 holding lanes and holds 124 vehicles on the dock, which is 1 full Issaquah class ferry. Lengthening the dock and moving the ferry slip to deeper water may allow eelgrass and macroalgae to regrow in and around the scour hole. And this would be the same for all of the lengthened dock alternatives. The next alternative B1, again, same length as alternative B, and includes 1 extra holding lane on the north side of the dock over deeper water. And it's over deeper water to minimize the impacts to Cove Park and environmentally sensitive areas closer to shore. With the added holding lane, this alternative holds 155 vehicles on the dock. B2, similar to alternative B, has 4 holding lanes, but adds 2 shorter holding lanes to the south side for priority vehicles. And this taper design of the dock allows for the narrower near shore to be narrower near shore and to minimize nearshore impacts. This concept holds 155 vehicles on the dock. Alternative B3 is similar to, but slightly shorter than alternative B2, and includes 1 less full-length holding lane, so it's narrower. The rest of the design features are the same as alternative B2, and this concept holds 124 vehicles on the dock. So in summary of the B concepts, the lengthened alternatives, there are 4, 2 of those hold 124 vehicles on the dock and 2 hold 155 vehicles on the dock. And they're all variations of a longer dock alternative. Then the last one, alternative C, is a longer dock alternative, and it's similar to alternative B2, but it adds a full-length holding lane on the north side of the dock. The dock is narrower near the shore again to minimize nearshore impacts, and the rest of the design features are similar as alternative B2, including the 2 shorter holding lanes for priority vehicles. This option is the option that holds 186 vehicles on the dock, which would remove vehicle queue on Fauntleroy Way Southwest on most typical days. And with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Laura to facilitate a Q&A session.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you for walking us through those alternatives. So we are at our first CAG member Q&A session. So if you'd like to jump into the chat or raise your hand, I want to make sure as we're going through our Q&A that we have an opportunity to hear from all 3 communities. So we'll be perhaps calling on you to speak up if we haven't heard from each of our 3 communities represented. And as a reminder, we also have the public comment period using the Q&A feature in Zoom reserved towards the end of the meeting. John, I see you have a comment in here in the chat asking for a bit more information about technology like good to go and advanced ticketing and how that might affect the dock geometry. As Dave mentioned earlier, we'll be focusing in more detail on good to go at our next meeting. Dave, do you want to jump in there to respond to John's question?
Well, I think you kind of hit on it, Laura. I mean, that's part of our, that'll be part of our presentation next time we meet. Certainly, we're kind of looking at each of these alternatives with an eye towards how good to go would be implemented, how effective it would be in processing vehicles faster, and how that processing improvement may or may not impact how the boat is loaded and unloaded. So those are great questions. We're going to have more at our next meeting.
Thanks, Dave. I see we also have a number of hands up. Scott, would you like to jump in?
Yes, thank you for being here. I had 2 questions. One, as far as the good to go, why isn't that being included under B and C? I think getting things faster all the time would be better all the time. So I'm confused about why that's not happening.
Thank you, Scott. Dave, I imagine that's another one that will come up at our next meeting, but if you'd like to respond there.
Yeah, I think the idea here, Scott, and this again is based on a lot of your team's feedback here, is looking at a dock that's roughly the same size as what we have today. We're trying to look at the improvements that good to go could or may not have on that size facility. Good to go will be less impactful when the dock becomes longer, because those cars would all stage, more of those cars would stage for the capacity of the boat, 124 cars on the dock and 124 cars on the boat. So it still would be something we could implement, Scott. Maybe that's an alternative B4 and B5. But I think the most bang for the buck is where we're really looking at this option to keeping the dock the same size. And we want to know how much good to go and advanced ticketing really improve operations on that alternative.
Now, the other question I had relates to the environmental issues. I really appreciate moving the dock out there to give the eelgrass a chance to recover. But another thing here that's not mentioned anywhere is how all of the alternative A's put more vehicles on Fauntleroy Way, and more importantly, put more idling vehicles on Fauntleroy Way. And when you put them on the dock, they turn the engines off here. You're moving down Fauntleroy Way, stop and go, stop and go, and stop and go, and people are keeping their engines on, even if they're there for a long period of time. So therefore, it should be noted as far as a negative that all the A alternatives have issues with pollution.
Thank you, Scott. And I know we don't want to jump ahead too much. We will be talking a lot more in the screening criteria conversation about the factors we're using to evaluate those alternatives. But Marcia, would you like to jump in there to respond and share a little bit more about the environmental review process?
Sure. Thanks, Laura, and thanks for the question. It is another area of the environment that we'll need to look at is air quality as part of the more specific and specific analysis under NEPA when we get to the environmental review phase, and which will follow using a strict methodology. We are also at Ferries, if you've looked along at our website, our sustainability action plan, we're working towards some types of regulations when people are using our facilities to reduce idling. There's already one for state employees and use of state vehicles that to turn off your motors so that idling is reduced. But for this purpose and this level of screening, we looked at just the nearshore environment and the area within the immediate environs of the terminal facility itself. And when we complete our traffic modeling and traffic so that we understand more about the number of cars that are going to be queuing up in the next phase of the work, we may be able to provide more information about air quality.
Thank you, Marcia. See, we have several folks with their hands raised. Judy, you've been waiting patiently.
Well, I too have multiple questions, but I will start with what concerns me most in that you appear to be designing a larger dock before knowing what effect increased efficiency of ticketing would affect the size. I mean, are you going to build a big dock anyway, regardless of ticketing efficiency? Is that the message that we should be getting from this kind of cart before the horse presentation?
Well, Judy, I kind of go back through what Ed presented here a minute ago with alternative A and A1 and A2. Alternative A is the same size dock that we have today. And what we've done is added in alternative A1, the idea of good to go, and an A3 adding in advanced ticketing. So we're starting with the base sort of same size dock, and then we're adding in those two alternatives and to see how operations improves and changes or stays the same when we add in those two variables. And so that is exactly what we're doing based on your input in the previous rounds of screening, so that we're really looking closely at good to go. And then to Scott's question, if that has advantages and we decide to go with a larger facility, then those could also be toggled in. But I want to just reiterate for everybody here, we're trying to be as objective as we can in looking at all of these range of alternatives, from the same size as what we have today to a dock that holds 186 cars. And we want all your input on all of these alternatives. That's why we're here. But nothing has been predetermined by any stretch.
Can I just add a piece to that, Dave, to clarify? Judy, we're not going to be doing the screening, applying the screening criteria until after we have the conversation about good to go and advanced ticketing at the next meeting, and that those studies have been completed. So nothing's going to be screened out or discarded or taken off the table until all those pieces are added into the mix.
I will beg your patience for one more question, and that is about the possible right-of-way acquisitions noted at Fauntleroy Way. Could you talk to those, because all of your drawings say something about acquiring property?
Thanks, Judy. Yeah, Dave, could you speak to that one?
So I know that terminology can be kind of alarming, Judy. We use the term acquisition to apply to both temporary and permanent acquisitions. It's just a word we use. We will need to get temporary rights to do any kind of improvements at the intersection. We do not own the property beyond our right of way, and those acquisitions include the ability to use SDOT's space there in the parking lot on the south side of the facility, as well as the King County facility, and potentially temporarily using the property that they own north of the pump station as construction staging. I know it needs not repeating, but there is nowhere out here to build a project upland. This is all going to have to be done from the water side. So any little bit of real estate that we can temporarily acquire to do that work is certainly a big plus for us.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dave. And that's actually related to a question that came up in the chat from Justin about impacts on service during construction, and specifically would service be rerouted temporarily? Do you want to take that one, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, that's been talked about. We're not close to making any kind of those decisions. Certainly, I think that the community would weigh in on that, and there'd probably be some folks on Vashon and Southworth that would love us to have some direct service downtown. But then there's lots of kids that are coming out of West Seattle and going to school on Vashon, and so we'd still have to, maybe it'd be a mix. I certainly it's premature to get into that, but it's certainly something we'll have to sort out. I can't iterate it enough. This is going to be a challenging site to construct on because of the limitations in our right of way. For those of you that watched us build the new terminal at Mukilteo, it was quite the opposite. We had a gigantic piece of property that we constructed on. We could maintain our operations the entire time that we built the new facility there. So this is a lot more challenging from a constructability standpoint.
Yeah, and this is another one of those topics that's going to be on the agenda for one of our upcoming meetings. Ed can speak to that. His team's working on a construction phasing and service options report that will look at sort of different options for during construction. Whether you know, how you phase the construction and what service can happen. So that's a topic of a future meeting as well. So much content, we can't fit it all in one meeting.
Sadly, and we have hands raised still. Frank.
Thank you. I'm coming back to the semantics of same size to similar size. All of these options increase the dock width by 18 feet, which is into your document you sent out today. It increases it approximately 20% at the very beginning. So, I mean, is that, that kind of came as a surprise. I understand, looking at the graphic, I understand what you're trying to do, which brings up a whole nother slew of questions. But I mean, are we to assume that 20% increase is just a foregone conclusion, or is that still something that's on the table? Because no options say same, they all say similar.
Thanks, Frank. I'm wondering if we might want to go back to that slide showing alternative A, and Dave, feel free to jump in, or we can turn it over to Ed to talk a little bit about why this alternative is wider than the current dock.
Ed, why don't you speak to the specific dimensions, at 85 foot width and the width at the mouth of the entrance?
Yeah, the width increase is primarily due to application of the design standards to try and bring this up to current and application, as an example, application of lane widths to meet standard widths that are required by WS operations and how they sort and manage traffic that is queuing and holding there on the facility. We've also added 2 additional bike lanes. There's a bike lane on the north for the inbound bicycle traffic. There's a bike lane on the south for outbound bicycle traffic. And we also have a dedicated motorcycle staging lane here, which all of those add up to provide that extra width.
And if I could just, I'm sorry to continue on this, but my questions arise to the motorcycle lane. Currently, motorcycles enter the facility in the exit lanes, and they go all the way up and they queue up in the front. If there's a lane dedicated to motorcycles on the far north side, the only way to get to that lane is going to be going through the toll booth. So are you saying that all motorcycles now have to queue in line and go through the toll booth, or create a cutting in line issue right at the toll booth?
The toll collection for motorcycles, yes, would need to be through the toll booths and then access that dedicated lane.
So they would have to wait in line like the cars and not just cut in line right at the end.
I can't answer that specifically. I think that we would have to have more discussion with operations staff to determine what they would allow.
Okay.
Thank you, Frank.
I think
Angus,
that's a
would like-
good question, Frank. So
Yeah.
we'll note that ops needs to clarify that.
This is great feedback, really helps us to work to refine these alternatives. Angus, we'd like to hear from you.
Yeah, I'm curious the degree to which you understand kind of in some sort of, I don't know, data science effort or multivariate analysis. If you compare to other docks in the system, as we go from 84 car holding capacity, which is effectively 68% of a ferry, 124 vehicles, which is 100%, up to 155 and 186, basically 125 and 150%. Is it understood what the impact on kind of percent of late trips? Is that analysis sitting somewhere?
You say as it affects late trips? Is that what?
Right, right. I mean,
Yeah.
so presumably the additional holding, increases efficiencies to some degree. And one of the key kind of missions is a reduction in, ferry delays and late trips.
Right, right. And certainly the ability to load and unload within the time that we've allocated is a big part of why boats get off schedule. There's other factors, including other vessel traffic, weather, orca whales, whatever, that gets our boats off schedule. The idea of looking at good to go and advanced ticketing in the smaller dock version as a way to try to simplify and process through the toll booth quicker is one alternative. These other alternatives that involve a larger dock is another way of minimizing the dwell time and making the system more efficient. So absolutely, we're looking at that. I know you're asking a very analytical question. I don't have the numbers in front of me that say what that percentage is or isn't, but I think you're hitting at that. If we have 124 car boats and we have 124 cars downstream from the toll booth, that will be our most efficient loading of that vessel, particularly if we can stage bicycles and motorcycles safely. There's advantages to that. Now, what we're going to do in this good to go study is try to look at how advanced ticketing and other forms of payment processing improves the efficiency of the operation if we stayed with a similar size dock.
And then one other piece of that is the traffic model, which is one of the reasons that the good to go study isn't quite complete, is it relies on results of a very complicated traffic model that the team's working on, that will also share how each of these alternatives performs, because it kind of models the traffic arriving and loading onto the vessel. And maybe we also remember your question, Angus, when we get to the next Q&A section after Marcia goes through the screening criteria, because there is one of the screening criterion is relating to maintaining on-time performance and meeting the current dwell times in the sailing schedule. So that's something that the alternatives will be evaluated on.
Great, thank you. And I have one more real quick one. Just curious, do you have a designer of say the 155 options? Is there a designer perspective on kind of, we can see a very kind of flat aesthetic, right, with these 2D images. Is there kind of design input for kind of the aesthetic and the impact on the shoreline, to the neighborhood?
Well, I think as we narrow in on an alternative, I think we're going to be doing some 3D renderings of what the facility would look like, if that's what you're getting at. And the engineering consultant that we've hired, that Ed Thomas leads that group, will be working on those renderings, and we'll have more to show on how that layout would look and the aesthetic of it. Certainly there's things as we can do as designers to improve that, and we want your input on that.
Thanks, Dave. Yes, early in the planning process, and that will be coming later on. I just wanted to jump back over to the chat where we have some great discussion, just noting Susan's comment, liking the idea of lengthening the dock for multiple reasons. For one, for more cars on the dock, less idling on the roadway, and less impacts to the nearshore habitat. Thank you for sharing that, Susan, just reading it out loud. And then also a question here, this one's for you, Dave, around overhead passenger loading was mentioned as a possibility, but not depicted on the alternatives. Could you talk a little bit more about when that comes into play?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the things I'm most mindful of in all these projects is kind of thinking about the future. And I certainly don't want to construct any of these alternatives without at least some being mindful of the fact that 50 years from now, the world will look different than it does today. And so overhead loading is one of those things that we want to study a little bit in terms of kind of Angus's question a little bit about how that affects the efficiency of the loading and unloading and minimizes the dwell time. That's certainly something that we've added at Edmonds, at Kingston, at Anacortes. Long after all those facilities were first built, overhead loading became almost a necessity based on the amount of walk-on riders that those routes had. And so those were things that we added years later after the dock was originally envisioned. So I think what we want to do is sort of explore that a little bit. That's part of this traffic analysis, is kind of dig into how much overhead loading would impact our ability to load and unload efficiently. We can save, at least several minutes, if not more, of time by not having the passengers cross the transfer span and load on the car deck. But we want to sort of explore that. And I think even if we build any of these options, as they're drawn up here on the slide, it would be nice to at least have that ability 20, 30, 50 years from now, when the demand is there, to add that in and let the next generation of engineers design it.
Thank you, Dave. Back to our hands over here. Larry, we'd like to hear from you.
Yeah, just a couple of quick questions. I would like to hear more about just to echo everybody else's comments, the difference between lengthening a wider dock. I personally feel like future capacity, it's like, if you're going to do this, I'm on the Kitsap side trying to represent the Kitsap side of the equation here, but I'm hearing a lot of the West Seattle residents kind of be concerned about, the stacking and the impact of the roadway and the idling. It does seem like, if you're going to do this at all, it does seem like leaning toward, some building and capacity is a good idea. So I'd like to hear more about that, just kind of the optioning. And then if folks are concerned about aesthetics, I don't know why folks would be opposed to a wider dock if they're on that side and already kind of complaining about impacts to adjacent roadway, and then also complaining about sort of a wider dock at the same time. So I'd like to hear more, maybe from fellow panelists here too, maybe in the chat or something. But the other thing that I haven't heard of that I think I'm maybe channeling everybody is improved efficiency. And so, I know over on the Kitsap side with our transit system, we have we have a very large major employer for our size relative to you guys over on the other side of the sound with all the population. We have the shipyard, and we have, worker transit, worker-driven buses, a worker-driven bus system, a very efficient fast ferry and foot ferry system that sort of supports and works alongside of the large ferries. I haven't heard, and I would like to hear more about, what can be done to help, commuters, and what's our commuter data today? What are our projections? Are there things we can do with buses? Are there things we can do with, getting more aggressive with park and ride, getting more aggressive with engaging other transit authorities? I know you guys work really hard and work closely with other, with like King County Transit and Kitsap Transit and others, but what can be done to sort of help along those lines? And so I would like to, and I'm thinking too along the lines of, what's our future look like? If we do see more density, if we do see more, maybe van pooling and more bus transit, and maybe, it'd be great to have more walk-on, if possible. I know that some other locations like Bremerton probably get a lot more than Fauntleroy does, but So I just would like maybe a little bit more data. I mean, not to reinvent the wheel or send you guys chasing, down rabbit holes, but I think that would be some good companion information. And I would like to see how that impacts, um, if there are any design impacts, or anything that should be thought about along those lines.
Thank you, Larry. Yeah, interest in operational efficiency and also some data points. A lot of food for thought. And Dave, did you have any thoughts about what Larry shared?
Well, that was a lot, Larry, and you hit on about 3 different themes that will be forthcoming in this screening analysis or screening criteria, and how we make decisions. But I think, we've heard that message about trying to improve multimodal connections, and trying to improve our carpooling program, trying to improve walk-ons. Certainly we have passenger-only service from Southworth and Vashon that are offered by Kitsap Transit and King County. And so those certainly are options for people. But at our terminal here at Washington State Ferries, we want to also encourage those things and those connections to the bus and to access program that King County provides to help get people with better mobility challenge down to the end of the dock and drop them off. I think that's also something that we're cognizant of. So those are all great thoughts, Larry, things that we definitely want to look at. And if there's things we can do to encourage different modes of transit and travel, certainly we're all for it.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you for those comments, Larry. Michelle.
You're on mute there.
Looks like you're still on mute, Michelle. We're still not able to hear you.
No.
Well, you're sorting out the technology. We'll move on to Justin, and please just let us know, Michelle, in the chat if you're not able to get the audio working, and we can be in touch.
Hi, thanks. This is Justin Hirsch representing Vashon Island. I've worked 20 years in the private sector maritime industry in marine terminals, loading and unloading more types of vessels than most folks have probably seen. I'm very happy to see alternative C because I know that that's about the size of the terminal that we need to maximize the efficiency on the triangle route. One of our biggest challenges at Fauntleroy is not only holding enough cars to load the boat, but being able to get those cars off the boat seamlessly and quickly enough and onto Fauntleroy Way that they're not delaying the next sailing. And so to that end, I think a longer dock, excuse me, will provide a little bit more of a holding area for those cars as they slowly feed out onto Fauntleroy Way, and also allow the vessel to reload at the same time while those cars that have just left the vessel are working their way onto Fauntleroy. My question is about whether in any of these alternatives, whether it be any kind of traffic control or intersection changes at the base of the dock. We've talked about a stoplight forever. There's a stoplight at the Coleman dock. It seems to work pretty well, and I think that would be a crucial function here. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. I know Dave mentioned that very briefly early on in the presentation. Dave, would you like to hit on that intersection changes?
I think, Justin, for all of us that have traveled through here, we've noted that there's a major safety concern at that intersection. You have vehicles turning, and sometimes 2 lanes trying to turn left into a single lane. I think universal amongst all these alternatives is the idea that there's improvements at that intersection. We are working closely with SDOT. We've kind of finalized an intersection memo that kind of lays out the problem and has a couple of alternatives, all of which include a signal that different phases, different periods of time, different ways to automate it and provide manual overrides. But nonetheless, it's a signalized intersection. Cognizant of the fact that we still have north-south traffic along Fauntleroy Way that wants to continue moving through there, but has the ability to accommodate that unload, which is so critical, Justin, to get the boat emptied And so we can make that turnaround and start loading again, and having an intersection that we can control and give some green time to that movement is key. So that's something that we'll be providing you all. We're still getting some feedback from SDOT on what we've proposed, but it's, in short, it's essentially putting a traffic signal there in some form or another that addresses the very point that you're raising, Justin.
Thanks. Can I just follow up real quick? I've put some thought into what we need to see in a terminal in general. And some time ago, I'd come up with what I called 3 keys to success at the Fauntleroy terminal. I'd like to just read them. Number 1 is passenger loading physically separated from vehicle loading such that both can occur simultaneously. 2, dock capacity that exceeds vessel capacity such that departures are not delayed by fare collection. And 3, effective traffic control to minimize or eliminate the frustration, accidents, road rage, and violence that regularly occurs on Fauntleroy Way Southwest.
Yeah, Justin, you had submitted those comments, and a number of others on Vashon have submitted similar comments, which is why those 3 elements are ones that Dave mentioned we're doing studies on and will be considered before any screening of any alternatives. The overhead loading, the intersection control, and good to go, I think, for where those 3 points are going to show up.
Yeah, and I actually said loading physically separated from vehicles, but that doesn't necessarily have to be overhead loading. And I just wanted to distinguish that point there. It's entirely possible to have a gangway connecting to another part of the boat. There's spaces there. There's a platform on each of these quad class ferries where the life raft attaches. And I think there could easily be some kind of additional structure from the terminal area going to the boat that could land on the boat and facilitate loading and unloading passengers separately from cars. It wouldn't necessarily have to be an overhead structure. Just my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. So we just have about 5 minutes left of Q&A, and we have several folks with their hands raised. Michelle, were you able to get your audio working? I don't think so. So we are going to have our Scott from our IT team reach out to you, unless you'd like to type into the chat. And Gary, we'd like to hear from you.
Yeah, yeah, thank you. Having done the review for the fire systems for the Coleman dock, I'm going to congratulate you mightily, because that was a massive project with a lot of complications that many people didn't probably understand. You mentioned the 50-year kind of look forward. I'm thinking that this is a 50+ year dock we're talking about, a new terminal. So I'm going to give you an alternative that I haven't seen here, and that is go for option C, but consider the possibility of not adding all the lanes now. Give yourself the opportunity to say, hey, we're going to make option alternate C our gold standard, and allow us the possibility of not building all of it today, with the potential you could add 2 lanes or 1 lane in a future iteration if that's needed, because I think that there's changes going on in the transportation world which may drive down the size of vehicles, use more walking, and not have the need for that full scale everything on the first build. So think about an option C. And if you have design standards for the roads, I'd like to take a look, or the lanes, I'd like to take a look at that if that's available somewhere. Thank you. Good job, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you, Gary.
Yeah, I do think we have that additional detail and appreciate that comment. Marty, you've been waiting patiently.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. The options range from 18 feet wider to 36 feet wider. And the diagrams, some of them showed the tapering not affecting much at the near shore, but some of them claim to be good for Cove Park, but have the full 18 width increase all the way back, which is somewhere around 25% of the near shore at Cove Park. So I'm either confused or that there's no option that doesn't affect Cove Park. So I'd like to have that talked about. And then the other question I have is, well, if you'll just listen for 2 more, which is, I've never seen this scour before. And there is no eelgrass growing under the dock that I'm aware of when the tide goes all the way out. So if we get rid of the scour, we still have the problem of the not enough light for eelgrass to grow under any structure that you build. Maybe you can talk to me about that and whether that's true or false. And then finally, as far as the traffic is concerned, I too would like to hear more about what it is other than a light. And remember that the boat takes 12 to 15 minutes to unload. And if that happens 3 times an hour with the 3-boat schedules, that means there's only 15 total minutes in an hour that north-south traffic can go down Fauntleroy. So I know that's, all in the future, but those are my 3 sort of things I'd like to.
Yeah, thanks, thank you, Marty. While we're looking at this environmental slide, Marcia, would you like to speak to the scour hole?
Sure. Thanks, Marty. Yeah, the scour hole is, a direct result of the prop wash. And then one thing I noticed someone said in the comments, but Dave did also explain that one element that's common to all of the alternatives is that the dock is raised approximately 4 feet from its current elevation in order to accommodate sea level rise. And then there will be fewer piles than the dense amount of piles that you see there today. And that in and of itself will help bring more light under there. But whether eelgrass or macroalgae will grow in that condition is yet to, something we'll need to investigate further. That because as you may know, eelgrass and macroalgae are sort of migratory. It moves around in its lifespan. But by having the prop wash effect moved further offshore into deeper water, we're confident that the existing scour hole can heal itself. And then with the elevated trestle, more light can be underneath, and we'll see how well eelgrass and macroalgae grow within that condition.
Thank you, Marcia. Regarding, I'm sorry, Marcia.
Yeah, and then you also asked about impacts to Cove Park. I think the alternatives represent a good range of how moving the dock further offshore, what it takes to taper into a larger surface structure over water further out. They demonstrate different ways for that to happen. And Cove Park, it's maybe not, it's something we can look further at, but I think with the project before us, whether it's temporarily or permanently, there's going to be some impact to Cove Park when we construct it, and some of that will be addressed during our project phasing. We'll see that distinction, but also I think some of the effect that you may see in this 2D image is that the accretion of sands along the shoreline is both something that's affected by vessels coming in, and that kind of prop wash does have a kind of a wave effect towards the shore, and also the way that there are dense pilings underneath. The drift that you see moving along here looks like Cove Park extends out further than it may change to be on its own. The sands in that location, when the terminal is elevated, when there are fewer piles and less debris, and Fauntleroy Creek can move about in a way that it needs to, that shoreline signature will change. So and another third aspect of Cove Park is working with the city of Seattle, since it is their property, it's an actual street end, is identifying clearly with them the boundaries of the park, and coming to terms with how that ends on the shoreline there at the water between where it ends at the water, and then being able to account for the square footage of extra trestle in those locations. Hopefully I'm giving you enough information to help you understand a bit more about the trickiness because of the confined location that we're in, that there will be some impact to Cove Park, and it'll vary in degrees, and the screening criteria also accommodates where it acknowledges that to various degrees.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Marcia. Just want to pause to see, just from a design perspective, Ed, is there anything else you'd like to add about just the way that the alternatives were designed to avoid impacting Cove Park?
Yeah, immediately adjacent to the Barton Street pump station, we have a minimum width requirement on the trestle there to provide an operation space to meet the existing needs. And then a little bit further out, as we get past the actual bulkhead wall that we have as part of the structure, any widening that we do with respect to bicycle lanes, motorcycle lanes, or the added width of the vehicle lanes, we've tried to taper that as we go further offshore to try and preserve the limits of Cove Park that are actually there. I don't know if you can we scroll to one of the alternatives, the plan view alternatives?
Yes.
Yeah. So right there, that line adjacent to the Barton Street pump station is a minimum width that is constant for all the alternatives to provide some additional operational space there. And then you can see that small taper as we go. I'm not sure what that distance is, 50 feet, 60 feet out from that. Then we start our taper to get into the actual holding lanes.
Ed, I know we were recently on site with our elected executive advisory group, and you and Charlie had some cones out there. Do you remember how far into the Barton Street pump station, just for those who know the site well, that bump out is? It's kind of hard to see on the aerial photo.
It is kind of hard to see. I don't remember that dimension specifically.
Well, what I think we could suggest, Laura's just reminding me, one of our plans for one of your upcoming meetings or in between meetings is to offer a site tour. We just did one with our executive advisory group, and Ed was able to mark on the ground using cones, kind of the dimensions of each of these alternatives. And it's a lot easier to visualize on site, Marty, and I think would help with the comments that several of you are making about how much of Cove Park would be impacted. You can see on site the boundaries of each of the alternatives. So I think this is making me think we need to get that scheduled and get that on the calendar sooner rather than later, so we can all be out there on site and see some of the operational challenges, but also see where these alternatives are visually.
Thank you, Hadley. I know, David, you've been waiting patiently. We also have some comments in the chat, which we will respond to as part of our next Q&A session. But David, we'd like to hear from you.
Hi, can you hear me okay? And can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you. Angus brought up an issue that I've very thoughtful of on this expansion. He brought up the design issue, and Dave Sowers mentioned that's going to start to be investigated fairly soon, I think. So one of the things that really, I think, impacts our Fauntleroy Cove neighborhood here is the ferry design right now is very industrial looking and doesn't fit well into a neighborhood design. And I think this new design should kind of embrace the neighborhood or give it some personality rather than the industrial feel. Now, there's nothing wrong with the industrial feel if it's done right, but there's a lot of options and alternatives, I think, that should be looked at. For instance, embrace maybe the culture of the Native Americans in the design, and or make the piers with some sort of design, or the toll booths, or the all the structure. So I would certainly like to see some investigation done on this end, because that would help it tie in and embrace the community more. So I think there's also options beyond those. Think of something like a Nantucket ferry terminal, which is very personal. It's not industrial, but it accomplishes both. And there's many, many more options like that. So I would just like to toss that out to the design committee to kind of take a look at some of those options. And other than that, there's so many issues. Is it going to be concrete piers, or is it going to be steel piers? I don't think they'll use creosoted wood anymore, but so maybe some detailing that can be implied with the steel or the concrete. But there's a lot of good designs that can be added just to the structure and made it blend in. So please take a look at those as you proceed.
Thank you, David.
Sure thing, David. Those are great comments, and there's certainly ways to dress up the face on the north side of the dock to make it look a little less industrial. We will be using concrete. We will be using steel, but there is a way to make that blend in a little bit better and dress it up a little bit so that it doesn't look so industrial like you described. Good comment.
Yeah, it really should embrace the neighborhood, and like I said, there's many, many ways to do that, but I would really highly recommend that you consider that as a key part of this design. And if you're going to start the design phase now's the time to start looking at those options. So, and especially if you're going to do an overhead trestle or loading area, I mean, that's got to be done so it kind of blends in too. And all of a sudden you got this bigger structure out at the end of the dock that, it's now just a big blob out in the middle of the cove. So just please keep those issues in mind.
Thank you, David. It's excellent feedback and excellent comments and feedback from the entire CAG. I know there's a lot more to say, and we will have some additional time after we talk about the screening criteria.
Laura, before you move on, I just want to make a note that we are seeing all the questions and comments coming in from members of the community who are here in the audience. I've responded to a number of you directly, and we will have time at the end of the meeting. I'll read some of these comments out loud to the CAG, and we'll answer your questions. So didn't want you to think we're ignoring those. We'll have a public comment period at the end.
Thank you, Hadley. Thanks for that reminder. Marcia is going to introduce the level 3 screening criteria.
So okay, they've brought up the screening criteria. You can follow along on page 27 of the alternative summary that was sent along to you. So there are many criteria listed here. So I'd like to we'll look at this more closely as we select the preferred alternative, and we'll conduct a level 3 screening process similar to how we did for levels 1 and 2 screening. As you can see, we've refined the screening criteria used in levels 1 and 2. So the first column on your left shows the criteria we used during level 1. And it's the same as you've seen before: ability to meet operational requirements, reducing the number of conflict points, accommodating projected sea level rise. And so that left column is very similar to the first few screenings. And then the second column shows performance metrics that we are going to be using to screen in level 3. And the third column shows how WSF plans to screen the alternatives using a yes or no, or high, medium, low, based on the metrics. So as you can see, our screening is much more detailed for level 3 using these specific metrics.
Thank
so
you.
Back to you, Laura.
Thank you, Marcia. With that, we will go back to our CAG discussion, and just a reminder, these are draft criteria. So we are really looking for your input to help finalize them before we look forward towards screening the alternatives. And I also just wanted to note, Michelle, I'm glad you were able to share your comment with us through the chat. And I think this is a comment, Hadley, that maybe you could speak to around future growth for projections, and how are you assessing growth needs beyond 186 car looking towards the future, as well as a question for Dave around whether or not we considered a second slip option similar to other terminals.
Yeah, in terms of growth, I think the short answer there, our long range plan that was published in 2019 does, and I'll put the link in the chat in a minute, does show sort of growth projections system wide and for this route in particular. But another way to look at it is that this route will continue to be served into the future by 3 Issaquah class ferries, each of which hold 124 ferry cars. That's the service plan. So that sort of constrains the growth that we'll be continuing with the same sailing schedule, the 3-boat sailing schedule that's not operating right now, but will be operating when we're able to restore full service to the route with 324 car ferries. So there's no plans to expand the number of cars transported by ferry on this route or to expand service on the route. It's just how those cars are managed in all of these alternatives, either held on the dock or held along Fauntleroy Way like they are today.
Thanks, Hadley. Dave, would you like to touch on the second slip question?
Yeah, I didn't see the exact question in the chat, but I know that that's a topic that's come up in the past, like overhead loading. I think it's something that we want to be cognizant of. It's not part of this project. It's not budgeted, but it's certainly something we would want to allow for years from now if that opportunity presented itself and it was funded. Because I think to some of your points, it would improve our reliability and on-time performance by having the ability for a boat to arrive while another boat that was potentially late was still offloading. So it's certainly something that we could, we won't design away from it, but we're not planning on including it in the current design.
Thank you, Dave. This next one in the chat is for you, Marcia. Frank is just noting that Captain's Park is mentioned in the screening criteria, and he's curious when that was considered as part of this project.
When we started looking at the need for some changes to the intersection, then Captain's Park also becomes a factor because the intersection, whether we use a signal or have to do some widening, Captain's Park could be impacted.
Thanks, Marcia. Marty, I see your hand up. Do you have feedback on the screening criteria?
Yes, I just wondered if you could clarify if the relative weight, for instance, overwater coverage versus efficiency, pedestrian distance, are they all equal? So that's one question. And so that's, can you?
That's a great question, Marty. How are we
Yeah,
applying these
one
criteria?
More. I'll just put one more out right now, which is, and
Okay.
also, is there anything in here, I didn't see it, where you're weighing these options based on the ability to keep service going during construction? Or is that like not something that you could put into a criteria here?
Thanks, Marty. Marcia, would you like to respond to both of those questions and comments?
Sure. At this point, this is a planning level screening, even though we're getting closer to we're into the 3rd phase of that screening. All of these criteria are weighted equally. It's just, they're not weighted. So if we were to weight them, we would be saying that one of them is more important than the other, or there are priorities, and that that decision has not been made. Usually, often weighting can be a good tool when you get to a point in screening, and there are several then that still several options or alternatives that screen out at an equal level, and you want to make some differentiation between them. But these alternatives are not using a weighted process. And I believe there is it's further down yeah, you've got it, utilities or construction, project feasibility. When we look at we develop the phasing, also we'll be looking at construction phasing, we'll be looking at how well these alternatives meet up, but the decision is not yet made about whether work happens whether the terminal continues to operate while construction is happening, or whether construction takes place in a fast, expedited way and then operations begin again. Some of that will be be related for further discussion at the next meetings that we have early in the year.
Thank you, Marcia. Judy, did you have a comment on the criteria?
I'd just like to hear a little bit more about Captain's Park. Are you considering the possibility of cutting more into the bluff, which would affect an important residential street and houses the whole area, plus it would be in the creek buffer? This is the first time that we've heard anything about Captain's Park.
Yeah, so Judy, apologies for that. One of the alternatives that came up in the intersection analysis that we were looking at involves, and you can appreciate this, a second lane on Fauntleroy Way to handle the left turn movements off of the dock. So right now, we have 2 left turn lanes, sometimes without police or traffic control, trying to turn left onto a 1-lane road. So one of the options that the consultant team put together was to expand Fauntleroy Way at that mouth of that intersection and have a second lane. The only way to do that is to push into that hillside a little bit, cut into that, build some sort of retaining wall, and mine out that toe of that slope. So that is not something we want to do as a preferred alternative, but it was an option that was brought up by our consultant team as a way to better handle 2 lanes of left turn traffic. Now, there's other ways to do it with the signal itself, but it's come up as an option, and we put it out there. And I apologize if it caught you off guard. It certainly is not as feasible as some of the other ideas we had, but it certainly would be one way to address the traffic coming off the dock.
Well, I encourage you to consider additional alternatives. That one would be really significant to the neighborhood, and you would, I think you'd find a can of worms. It's got archaeological implications as well.
Yep, you're right.
It's just, you know.
Yep, there's trade-offs in everything we do, Judy, and certainly if we don't cut into that hillside and create that extra lane, it takes time away from the unloading, and so there's always going to be compromises. That's the difficulty of this project, is trying to find that sweet spot where it works for we find the best alternative.
I recognize that. I'm just saying that would be a huge thing for the neighborhood.
Thank you. We
Understood.
Appreciate that, Judy. Dave, while you're off mute, we also have a question from Frank here in the chat about whether cost will be considered as part of the screening criteria.
Yeah, certainly cost comes into play, Frank. I don't know if you've seen some of the articles in the Seattle Times recently about the cost escalation of these mega projects around Seattle, but whether it's the material availability or labor availability or loss of contractors, costs seem to be growing a lot, and we certainly are not deaf to that. I think we're certainly going to have to go back to the legislature and ask for the money that's necessary for whatever alternative we propose, and I think that plays into what we do. We have to be mindful of that factor always. I always wanted to drive a red Ferrari, Frank, but sometimes the budget doesn't really work out that way, and we're all mindful of that. We do have to ask our 147 friends in Olympia for their support of this and to fund the project.
Well, and just Frank, I don't know if you saw it because Haley just scrolled to it, but there is a screening criteria for project cost. It's on the screen right now.
Yeah, there you go.
So
Thank you.
it is going to be considered, and it is one of the screening criteria. The relative cost between all of these different alternatives compared to the available funding.
Thanks for pointing that out, Hadley. And thank you, Dave. Victoria.
Sorry, just before we keep going, I know some of you look like you're craning to see the screen, that this screening criteria is in the memo that we sent out to you by email on Friday. So if it's easier for you to read the document as a PDF that was sent to you, then what's Haley's scrolling on the screen, just a reminder. You have it in your email.
Yeah, thanks, Hadley. We zoomed in as much as we can, but it's definitely a bit tricky to see. Go ahead, Victoria.
At some point, will you be speaking to the apparent, I don't mean this in a negative way, but the disconnect between actually getting the ferries that we need on this route? Because we're having trouble even finding someone to build the ferries that we're building this dock for. And it seems like we could be years out before we have the actual ferries to support the restructuring of this dock.
Hadley, would you like to respond to that, or?
Yeah, this route's served by Issaquah class ferries, which are 124 car capacity. The ferries that we're building, the hybrid electric Olympic class ferries, that you're right, are taking longer to build than we'd originally expected, are 144 car Olympic class ferries. They're not the kind intended for this route. We did in our long range plan project needing more Issaquah class ferries further out into the future as the next round of new builds, but we do have the ferries in the fleet now that serve Fauntleroy, Vashon, Southworth route.
Thank you, Hadley. And just looking over to the chat to see if there were any new questions or comments. I know we had some earlier that I want to make sure we get back to, but before we, oh, Justin, I see your comment here. So again, Hadley, this is for you, and related to our community engagement process. How does the input from the other two advisory groups, our technical and an executive, interact with the input from this group? And in other words, could this advisory group select an alternative that is vetoed by the CAG or the EAG? How are we considering input from all three advisory groups?
Well, the input is intended to be balanced among all three. And again, these are all of them have the word advisory in them, and they're meant to advise us. We're not going to be asking for any votes or consensus or any sort of taking a vote among the different advisory groups, and all the input from each of the three advisory groups is useful in different ways. All of you represent the communities served. The technical advisory group represents our agency partners, many of which have a permitting role in the project. So keeping them up to speed as we go along is really important. They'll have other ways of influencing the outcome of the project based on what their agency's role is in the project. And then the executives, some of whom are legislators, have a funding role and other oversight of different elements of the project. So in different ways, everyone involved in the advisory groups kind of has a say in what happens. Community advisory group being, the core of the customers that we serve, the communities we serve, but input is valuable in different ways, but it won't come down to sort of voting or anything like that. And I think we made that clear in the charter when we first started this group, that it's advisory only. And the idea is to try to have all three communities sort of come together with a shared understanding of the ultimate alternative that we select, and informed consent, even if it's not your preferred alternative going into the process, by understanding each other's perspectives. Does that address your question, Justin?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Hadley. That's why the input you're all providing tonight on the alternatives, as well as the process we're using to evaluate those alternatives, is so important. Anne, I see your hand is up.
I actually have a follow-up to what Justin just asked about. Who at Ferries actually applies these criteria? Sorry about that. I guess.
I'm so sorry. That was my fault. I tried to mute myself and accidentally muted you. I'm very sorry.
Okay. I was following up on what Justin just asked. Who at Ferries actually goes through the process of looking at the criteria, making a decision about whether it's the low, medium, or high, and then comes up with the answer? Is it a group of people at Ferries, or how does that work?
Yes, but I'm going to let Marcia tell you more about that process.
Yeah, it would be the team together, probably in a workshop setting, walking through each of these criteria and looking at the alternatives and assigning high, medium, or low to it. That's the best model. For expediency, they may assign just the environmental staff to take a look at it and run through their sections that are appropriate to them, and we may assign sections that are appropriate to the engineers to look at, and then come together and walk through our reasoning together and of high, medium, and low, or yes or no. But it's in that collaborative setting between the different expertise on the team that we come to decisions about the screening criteria. And then once we've completed that work and have that in a draft state, we would bring it before WSF executive managers to review our work and to hear more feedback from them about how and to true some of those decisions about high, medium, and low, and yes or no.
And then all of you have a role as well, because once that's done, similar to what we did during level 2, where we brought you that matrix with the different colors in it, screening the alternatives, we would bring our, draft results of the screening criteria to you at one of your future meetings and have a conversation, get input. You would have the ability to say something doesn't make sense, or perhaps you disagree with the high, medium, low, and the other advisory groups as well.
When is the right time for us to provide specific feedback on this? Is it now? Is it 6 months from now? Is this our only opportunity to respond to it, or I'm just trying to understand process.
I mean, the process is iterative, so specific feedback on what we sent you in email, that alternatives memo, and what we're discussing today is very much welcome now. I think we talked about this early on, like speak up when you have a comment and don't wait till later on in the process because it's less useful, but you'll have other chances at the same information. We're not making any decisions immediately. I think we've made, as a lot of the questions here today have made clear, there's a lot of information that still we're going to bring before you before any screening is done, before any preferred alternative is identified. So the answer is both. Specific feedback now on the information we presented to you is great. Specific feedback on some of the information that's coming, like the good to go study, the intersection study, some of the other pieces will be very much welcome. And then once the screening is done, before we make a final decision on a preferred alternative, you'll have another chance to weigh in.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Hadley.
Process may seem somewhat tedious, but it's intentionally giving lots of opportunity for feedback.
Thanks, Hadley. And I think what I'm hearing you say, Hadley, is that if CAG members have feedback after tonight, as they're processing this information, they can send that in by email as well.
Yes, please. If you have specific comments on that document, please make them, or think of things after the meeting in addition to all the comments today.
Thank you. Yeah, we recognize this is a lot of information, and I appreciate all of the conversation tonight. Susan.
Just a comment on the criteria. I don't think I see this in there, but I would like to see a factor added that is related to reducing the queue on Fauntleroy, because I feel that there's a lot of negative impacts to just the traffic safety along that arterial related to the queue occurring along Fauntleroy. So I just would ask that that might be something that could be added as a criteria factor.
Thank you, Susan. I know Hadley had talked earlier about the traffic model coming. I don't know, Dave, if there was any responses other than that, some feedback we can share with our team.
I think it's something we should just discuss with the team. It's sort of been part of some of the criteria, but something I think Marcia and the rest of the team we could look at, make sure it's really clearly in there.
Thanks, Hadley. Justin.
Hey, just a comment I neglected to make earlier, but on the motorcycle lane in the several of the alternatives that were presented, you know, the concern that was voiced earlier about having to make the motorcycles, you know, cross over the existing traffic lane is definitely real, and that's something that could lead to conflicts on Fauntleroy. You know, if instead there was a way to put that motorcycle lane on the south side of the dock, I think that might reduce some of that. As a regular motorcycle commuter now, there's plenty of times when you arrive early before the departure of the ferry, but you know, boats unloading or traffic on Fauntleroy Way or whatever, and you can't, you know, safely get to the end of the dock. So I do think a motorcycle lane's a pretty important thing and will definitely speed up loading. But the fare collection through those hand scanners actually worked pretty well. The new scanners are a lot more efficient than the old scanners were. The old scanners, the ticket taker used to have to try and adjust it and block out the sun, and now they work first click every time. So, you know, I don't necessarily think it's absolutely required for all the motorcycles to go through the toll booth to make sure that you're not missing that fare box recovery there. Just wanted to share that.
Thank you, Justin, for that feedback. And Ed, I don't know if that spurs any thoughts on your end in terms of the alternative layout and the placement of the motorcycle lane. Something we can share with the team.
Nothing right now, Laura. I think we have to go back and have some further discussions with operations staff.
Great, thank you. One of the comments that I wanted to circle back from earlier, this was from Devin and is related to transit connections. So just noting with the longer dock, the walk to transit is close to a quarter of a mile. Are there any plans to include a bus stop on the dock near the terminal? I know that would conversations with King County Metro, which is part of our technical advisory group. But Dave or Hadley, did you want to respond to that comment from or question from Devin?
I'll let Dave or Ed respond to that one.
Yeah, well, saw another comment too about the longer dock means it's going to be a longer walk for pedestrians. I certainly that's a concern, and it's certainly a drawback of that those alternatives. There is the ability for the access buses to get down to the end of the dock and help those that are mobility challenged. That level of detail has not been sorted out yet in terms of how, you know, obviously we have a rapid ride stop at the end of the dock, and we plan to fully utilize that and provide whatever improvements we can at that intersection that makes that more attractive to walk-on passengers. But putting an actual stop at the end of the dock, again, the space is so limited. We're trying to minimize the amount of width. Although it's wider in some of these scenarios, we're still trying to minimize that amount of width because it affects eelgrass beds and there's cost associated with it. So having a drop-off point at the end, I think, other than the access buses, is probably not going to happen. But that's something we can certainly dig into a little bit more and get more feedback to this group.
Yeah, I'm just pointing out, thank you, Haley, for scrolling to it, that one of the screening criteria is the distance in feet of the trestle. So that's something that would be kind of captured during screening, those relative differences in how long walk-ons would need to walk out the terminal to get on the ferry.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for that question, Devin. And Justin, I appreciate your comments in the chat as well about the bus connections on the Vashon side and the benefit that provides. Frank, I saw you had a comment earlier that is related to the criteria, and it's related to sea level rise. And you had a question there about if we had determined the sea level rise. Marcia, could you speak to that? And I'll
She
scroll up.
did.
So
She did. She mentioned 4 feet, so my question was answered.
great. Okay, that came in before we got to that. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure we were getting through all of these questions and comments that we've received throughout the meeting. I think with that, I know this has been a lot of content. Oh, go ahead, Frank.
You bet. Thank you. I do have another question, and maybe I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but there's been a lot of points brought up about, well, first off, we've not had a meeting for a year. So, I mean, the clock has ticked, but we've not had any of these opportunities. But yet there's lots of comments, the traffic study, a lot of things yet to be discussed or have said we would be discussing. I would just like to put in, again, maybe I'm off topic here, but I'd like to, are we going to have like meetings every month from here on out till the end of this thing? So we have 10 more meetings, because it seems like that's what it's going to take, or close to that. There's a lot to talk about. Now, granted, Hadley, you did say that what we have to say really has no bearing on the project. So I appreciate the honesty on that. And
that's not what I said, Frank. I'll stop, but please don't mischaracterize what I said, that you're all important advisors and public input will be important. CAG input is very much. I mean, I think a lot of the comments we've heard today already have a bearing on the project, because I could see Marcia taking notes, and I'm sure she's going to start talking about some of these things. But to your question about the timeline, so Haley, maybe you can go back to the slide about the timeline, that maybe this got kind of, I know we sort of went over it quickly. We haven't had a meeting in a year, but we've also extended the Pell process by more than 18 months. So we're not saying we're going to all of a sudden make a decision having not spoken to you in a year. There's a lot more time still to go during this planning study, where we'll be having many meetings. There you go. Marcia, do you want to kind of recap some of the next steps and where the timeline is a little bit different from the last time we met?
Yeah, and I want to have you take note too of the bottom green line with the arrows pointing both left and right. We do have some points where we're thinking we'll have enough of our work done so that we can come back to you and make good use of your time, like we've been discussing coming back in the early part of next year. But the bottom line is generally left ambiguous, because there could be other interim meetings that we need to have along the way as we do our work, and we'll continue to have those opportunities up through development of the environmental study, and then into design and construction. There will be opportunities to get your feedback, and we take note of your feedback. So you see where we are here. And so today we're doing our best to relay to you our draft criteria and how we've developed some of the alternatives to date, so that we get your feedback. And there's been a lot of good comments and things that we're taking note of in tonight's meeting. So we'll take that back with us as we continue to work on some of our interim studies, like the traffic congestion memo and our compilation of environmental information, and use that when we begin to do the screening process, and also to update the screening criteria based on any comments that you've brought to us. And as Hadley noted, it's all iterative. So we could be coming back to you at another point closer to that timeline in the beginning of next year, and then shortly after that. It just depends on where we are with the work and how we are able to incorporate what we hear from the community.
Yeah, and then
helpful?
Frank, thank you for your apology in the chat, your choice of words, but just to underscore that the feedback is extremely helpful, but the feedback is also, even today, what we're hearing is there's many different perspectives. So it's going to be impossible to take everybody's perspective directly, because I see just as many supportive comments for alternative C and some of the larger dock alternatives as I see concerns expressed for any expansion of the dock or impacts. So the whole idea here is to balance and to hear from everybody and to allow everyone to express their opinions. And there's a lot of different perspectives on this CAG, which is the benefit of it. So it doesn't mean that someone's input wasn't heard, just if we're not able to take everybody's input and directly incorporate it into the project.
Thank you, Hadley and Marcia, for that response and for your question, Frank. And I think to answer part of your question there too, we're going to talk a little bit more at the end about some of the upcoming meetings, but you can expect a more regular cadence of CAG meetings with many of the topics that we've talked about this evening. And also just want to acknowledge the entire project team and the work that they've done to really incorporate what we've heard so far from all three communities. And I hope you do see some of that input reflected on the range of alternatives and the draft criteria that we shared with you tonight. Hadley, I know we have many comments from our community members and attendants, and so would like to move us along to answering some of those and sharing them with the advisory group.
Yes, I do have a number of comments that have come in the Q&A, and some of them are questions. So I'll let members of the project team answer them. Thank you all. This is the largest audience we've ever had for a CAG meeting. So it's really good to see all the interest from the community. And this also means we need to probably have a public meeting soon, which we'll discuss with the CAG as well, to provide more opportunity for public comment. I also want to give a special thank you to the students from Maritime High School, the 11th graders who have decided to focus their studies on this project and have agreed to be interns for us on this project. They've already been extremely helpful. A number of them are listening in today. And so thank you to all of you. And I'm really looking forward to your input on the project when we meet again next week. So let's just starting at the top, we've gotten a number of public comments. I'm going to read some of them, and then those that are questions, you can help me answer, Dave and others. The first comment is, I like the longer dock options. However, it also means a longer walk for pedestrians. Have you considered moving walkways? Ed or Dave, do you have an answer to that?
Well, we haven't considered moving walkways, but those have their own challenges in terms of mechanical operability and keeping them out of the, we're obviously on the in a saltwater environment, and they would have to be covered, and so there's a lot of cost and associated with that. But I do say that in the screening criteria, it was something that we are considering. It certainly, for people that are mobility challenged, it obviously makes it more difficult to get from the bus to the end of the dock if you add another couple hundred feet. So certainly something that we're looking at, but we haven't gotten to the point where we're designing the walkway yet, or even looking at movable walkways.
Okay, thanks. The next comment is, I think it's important to remember that the Fauntleroy neighborhood is one of many neighborhoods in West Seattle, and that the CAG does not speak for all or even most of West Seattle. A lot of West Seattleites want a larger dock that helps the ferry system function better. We use the ferries to get to school, vacation, work. So thank you for that comment. The next one is question. Could construction be done simultaneously while the dock is still open for commuting? I know we talked a little bit about construction phasing, but Dave, could you answer that question?
Well, that's a really good question and a really difficult question to answer. If you followed any of the construction that went on at Coleman Dock, we have a 500 car dock and plenty of uplands area to stage vehicles. And granted, it's a much busier route, but building anything while it's under construction, whether it's remodeling your kitchen or remodeling a ferry terminal, is very difficult when you have to keep parts of it open and move. What I last saw was over 3 million passengers a year. So that's a difficult question to answer. I know Ed and his team are working on the constructability and phasing elements of it. I think someone asked earlier what the dock height would change as a result of our estimates of climate and sea level rise. Certainly now, if you build it in phases, you'll have portions of that dock that are quite elevated compared to the existing dock. And so how do you make those transitions between the two? It's a really difficult question, and certainly a contractor would love to just go in and shut the route down, blow the whole thing up and build a new dock, but that's not practical or feasible either. So that's something we're going to have to weigh, and we'll try to come up with a good solution, and we'll certainly be talking to all of you about that and what kind of impacts that would have on the offshore side of things.
Okay, the next question, Dave, is also one for you. Do these options ignore the previous resolution passed by Seattle City Council? And for those that don't know, that's a resolution from the 1990s that that considered expansion of the terminal, the city's opposition to expansion.
Yeah, that's a great point. We've talked to SDOT about that. Certainly, we've talked to our Attorney General's office a little bit about the legality of that document. The city does grant permits. They have final say on for example, on the shoreline permit. And so anything that we do, whether it's 3 inches wider or 30 feet wider, would involve a lot of conversation with the city. And that's why we're engaged with city council members in our executive advisory group. And we certainly want to navigate that resolution that was passed, regardless of how much teeth you think that document has. It's something that we're very cognizant of, and we will try to work closely with the city on that.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Next question, that written in a fairly disrespectful way, but I'll try to paraphrase it. It's the reason that we're not having in-person meetings for this CAG, which is something that this group agreed to early on when we had a chartering session. And when we formed this group, we agreed that doing the meetings on Zoom was a way to allow all 3 communities to participate equally without having to have long ferry rides and travel or be impacted or limit their ability to participate, because this group does represent Fauntleroy, Southworth, and Fauntleroy, which is Fauntleroy, Southworth, and Vashon Island, which is why we're holding the meetings on Zoom, and we'll continue to do so. We may consider holding in-person public meetings at some point along the way if the CAG advises us that that might be a good idea for each community. But these meetings will continue to be on Zoom so that we can get everyone around the same virtual table. I guess if there was any benefit from COVID, it's that we're now used to this type of meeting.
Yep.
So I'm going to move on to some other comments and questions that were entered at the beginning of the meeting. The first one is, please build the alternative that has the most cars on the dock. The next one is, the longer dock mitigates the idling of vehicles along Fauntleroy Way. We already discussed construction phasing. This is a question, I think, for our CAG members, so maybe some of you want to answer it. What are the inherent potential negative long-term impacts of a longer, wider dock? It seems like people are resistant to this, and it's not clear what the concerns are. So I don't want to put any of you on the spot, but those of you who do have concerns about a longer dock, do you want to answer that question from a member of the public? No? Okay. This next one is, I like the longer dock options. Oh, I already answered that one. The next one is, please fix the mess on Fauntleroy. This is a huge safety issue. There just cannot be parking on Fauntleroy headed to the ferry. Let's see. Next one is, with removal of the multiple creosote pilings under the dock and going to fewer concrete and steel structure, the sand peninsula will decrease, and thus so will the scour issue. There needs to be an analysis of the impact of the new in-water structure to minimize the impact on longshore transport. The scour issue may well go away on its own when there's an improved in-water design and higher water levels. Marcia, do you want to touch on that? Is that something that you'll be studying?
Sure. At this point, this is a planning and environmental linkages process. So we're heavily on the P side, where we're understanding at a reconnaissance level how our designs are impacting the environment. And so when we choose a preferred alternative, we can dig in deeper and do the kinds of studies that you've mentioned here to understand sediment transport along and how the proposed alternative would be affecting that. At this point, we are still at a comparison level of the different alternatives and looking at how from at a higher resolution level how the impacts will be and what would be resolved based on the alternative design.
Thanks, Marcia. The next comment is a second issue that has been brought up is that the West Seattle community wants to get cars off Fauntleroy. That is not true. Residents, even those north of the ferry dock, have no expectation for the cars on Fauntleroy waiting for the ferry to go away. The reality is, even with alternative C, there will be cars along Fauntleroy waiting for the ferry. The issue is trying to help get people promised more quickly, not create more overwater parking. I think it would be helpful for WSF to put up a sign on Fauntleroy Way that says something like, if you are here, you are likely to make the next ferry. That way people could relax a bit when they are in line. So thank you for that comment. Justin will recognize that comment because it's something the Vashon FAC has asked us as well, to have markers along the queue, letting folks know what ferry they're likely to get on. The next one is, has there been any study of the impact of these alternatives on the views from the shore and from the community? The bird's eye view doesn't address the views from Cove Park or people who walk or live on the beach. Marcia, that's another one maybe you could address.
So tonight you got to see some of the 2D and oblique, slightly oblique renderings, and we will be working on some different renderings that help show at a more 3D level. But the view quality and that type of analysis is really going to be reserved for when we are in the environmental review phase and looking at it more specifically for the preferred alternative. That's where we'll be able to, in that type of study, you identify who the users are and where the viewpoints are. But in the planning document, we have some of that information, but not to the detailed level that your question is asking about.
Good, thanks, Marcia. Dave, you talked earlier in the meeting about whether we're looking at adding a second slip to the dock. There's a question about that. Could you just repeat briefly what you said?
Well, I don't want to preclude the option at some point, future, future engineers at Washington State Ferries want to add that, but it's not in the budget. A second slip would cost well north of at least $40 million, and that's just not in the budget. We don't, we have to work within the, I think Frank asked the question earlier, we have to work within the dollars that were appropriated, and while certainly we could go ask for that, there's a lot of projects out there that are looking for money, and as I said earlier, a lot of the projects are finding a significant amount of cost growth. So it's something that we'd like to see at some point as whatever we build into the base design, but it's not part of this project.
Okay, thanks. Frank, did you have a question or comment about one of these comments?
I'm sorry, you asked a question before about people that live in the neighborhood and our perspective on this. I wanted to respond to that. I do live in the Fauntleroy neighborhood. I am directly affected by the ferry traffic on the north side of the dock every single day. When I bought this house, I did not expect that ever to go away. I knew what I was getting myself into when I bought this house. Some of the things that we in the Fauntleroy community are concerned about is, we drive the West Seattle Bridge. If you take 126 cars and you put a light at that intersection and all 126 cars go in one solid steady line up Fauntleroy, they're going to get to the bridge. So everybody in West Seattle now is going to be affected by the impact of that on the bridge. This is a West Seattle, concern and an issue where people may say, well, are we concerned about our view? Yeah, I am. I live here. This is the house I chose to buy. And yes, I am concerned about that. I think we all are concerned about those things that affect our individual neighborhoods. But, this is more than that. We're also trying to look at this as, One of the things that we believe is that this ferry route has the highest single passenger vehicle use on any of the system. Like to get validation, if I could ask one of the panel members to please provide that answer next time, what your guys, information says. I would love to hear that. But, I don't think that's what we want, right? I think we would rather see higher density. We'd rather see less traffic, less pollution. So I just wanted to chime in from a resident of the neighborhood. I apologize for taking more time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Frank.
Thank you, Frank.
Can
Okay, so
I, Hadley, just speak to the traffic signal? Frank, and others that have asked this question, I can't remember if it was Marty, also had a similar point. We were going to work closely, as we already have started with SDOT, on how the timing for that signal would work and how to optimize the unload of the vessel through that intersection and to points north and south. We have a similar relationship with the Public Works Department at Edmonds, the city of Mukilteo, the Coleman Dock. We have the ability to manually override the signal. We have the ability to work with all of those Public Works departments and get their signal guys out there and add a little green here and a little red there. So we're not just going to plaster this thing onto your community and expect you to just live with those 126 cars or whatever. There is the ability to iterate and come up with an approach for manning that signal that allows to optimize the north-south flow traffic through there, as well as address the pulses of ferry traffic that are trying to unload.
Yep, which is all a topic for one of our future meetings, Dave. So we're out of time. I want to respect your time. You've given us 2 hours on a Wednesday evening. There are a number of other public comments, a lot of comments coming in. So we will summarize those, share out with you the entire public comments summary. There's been a number of comments that have been submitted since you last met as well that we'll share, that come in by email. Members of the public, I see your comments in here, and then also Haley shared the project email earlier in the meeting. So please send us any further thoughts you have or questions, and we'll get back to you by email, and we'll share the rest of your comments with the CAG after this meeting. So Laura, I'm going to let you wrap it up.
Thank you, Hadley. We just have one more slide here, which is just looking ahead. We've talked a lot about some of the topics that are coming up in our next meeting as we continue the Pell study. But first, we are meeting with our technical advisory group tomorrow morning for a similar conversation and to hear their feedback. And then again, looking ahead, we are expecting our next CAG meeting in early 2024, so early next year. As Hadley mentioned earlier, we can also consider the idea of an on-site tour if that's something you all are interested in. And then we'll be looking forward to community meetings, applying those level 3 screening criteria before ultimately identifying a preferred alternative and completing our Pell study, as Marcia shared with us earlier. And with that, we will go ahead and close out the meeting. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, all of our CAG members. We're looking forward to seeing you all more regularly. And thank you to all of the folks who joined us to listen in to the meeting tonight. Hope you enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Thanks for the time.
Thank you, everyone.